Today we're going to learn about cross-hatching. So cross-hatching is a method of line drawing that describes light and shadow, and it shows this light and shadow depending on the density of cross lines. So on the top one we did lines all going in one direction. On this one we are going to have lines that cross with each other. So the first thing we're going to do is start taping it down. And once we are ready, we are going to start with the darkest area. So for our darkest area, we are going to start by doing what we have done so far for the hatching. So we are going to start with lines all going in one direction. And we're going to fill in that square. Keep the lines very close to each other. Keep it still very dark. So we have all the lines going in the same direction. Once we're done with that, we are going to start our cross-hatching part of this process. As you can see, I'm rotating my sketchbook because that makes it a lot easier for me to go in the opposite direction. So I'm just going to start going opposite direction of what I've just created. So if I went diagonal one way, I'm going to go diagonal the opposite way and kind of sort of create this sort of grid looking thing that is going to be our cross hatching. So this square is going to be very dark still, but we're still going to be able to see those lines crossing each other. And as you can see in this close-up, we are going to be able to see those lines crossing each other. So as soon as we're done with that square, we are going to start peeling off the tape and start setting up our lightest square. So for this one, it's going to be pretty much a similar thing. We are going to look kind of like at what we did for the hatching, and we are going to do it for the cross hatching as well, having those lines overlap and cross each other. So we are going to start having those lines all go in one single direction and then start going in the opposite one. So as you can see in this square, we are going to keep a lot of white. We are going to be able to see through the grid. We're going to be able to see the paper, and it's going to look lighter than the other one. Once we're done with that, we're going to peel off the tape and set up our middle one to get started on that one as well. So for this one, we are going to do basically the same thing again, keeping our lines very, very close to each other, but still being able to see the background, still being able to see what's underneath, so the paper, and still keeping a little bit of white that we can see through. So we start going in one direction and then we create the lines on top of it, overlapping, going in the opposite direction. So as you should be able to see, once I'm done with this square is going to definitely look darker than the one we just created, but definitely a lot lighter than our darkest one. So once we're done, we're going to peel off the tape and start setting up for the medium to dark square. So for this one, our lines are going to be so close together that it's going to look like they're almost overlapping, but they're not going to be overlapping just yet. So make sure that they're so close together where we can barely see the paper underneath, but they are not overlapping too much with each other. So it's going to look dark, but not too dark. So once you have those lines all going in one direction, what we're going to do is you can rotate the sketchbook if need be, and we are going to start going in the opposite direction. And as you can see, I had a spot that looked a lot more white than the rest, so I just added a couple of extra lines to that area as well. So I'm just going to fill in, going the opposite direction, fill in that whole square, and see that it's going to look darker than the one we just created, but still always lighter than our darkest one. So now that I've peeled off my tape, you should be able to see the difference between those three squares that we've just created, and you should be able to see the difference in values. So the middle one is going to be lighter than the other two, and then the darkest one is going to be darker than the other two. So it should go from lightest to dark. So for this one that we are going to create, which is our medium to light one, we are still going to keep those lines very close to each other, but in a way that we can see the paper very well underneath still. So not as far as our first one, as the lightest one, but we are still going to keep them very close together, very tight. So once we're done going in one direction for the diagonal, we are going to start going in the opposite direction as well. So once we peel that tape off, we are going to definitely be able to see the difference between all of our squares. We are going to see the difference in value. We are going to see how it goes from the lightest to the darkest one. And I will add a final picture on how it turns out. So when you look at the picture, you will be able to see all those differences in value for this entire value scale. Good job.